I never thought I would feel guilty about this too, because guilt was something I knew well. I felt it when I didn't visit my mother as often as she expected. I felt it when I left the dishes in the sink from the night before. I even felt it when I took a day off just for myself, without doing anything useful. But this guilt here, this was different. It didn't come from something I had done wrong. It came from precisely the opposite, from having nothing else to do. And that should be good, right? After 70 years of serving, caring for, and organizing the lives of others, finally having time for myself. But nobody warned me that when that time came, it wouldn't be accompanied by peace. It arrived empty. And worse, I felt guilty for feeling that emptiness. Before we begin, if this type of story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll always be notified whenever a new narrative like this is shared here. These are simple human stories, meant to be listened to calmly perhaps when you need them most. The first time I noticed was on a Thursday morning. I had just finished my coffee, alone, without any rush, as always. I washed the cup. I dried it. I put it away in the cupboard. I looked at the clock, 9:15. And I thought, and now what? It wasn't a practical question. I had things to do. I always did. I could sweep the porch, water the plants, sort clothes for donation. But none of those things needed to be done now. None of them really mattered. And that's when that strange feeling came over me. Like I'd forgotten something important, but couldn't remember what it was. I sat in the kitchen chair and stood there, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It took about 5 minutes for me to realize I was waiting for someone to call me, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for something to tell me what to do next. But nobody cared. Nobody needed me that morning. And I sat there, feeling something I couldn't name. For years, my routine was built around the needs of others. Waking up early to make coffee before my husband left. Preparing the children's lunchboxes, remembering appointments, birthdays, bills. After they grew up, I continued. I took care of my mother when she was ill. I took care of my husband in his final years. I was the one who was always available, the one who solved problems, the one who never complained. I didn't see myself as a martyr, not at all. I liked being useful. I liked feeling that my presence made a difference. That, if I wasn't there, something would fall apart, and maybe that was true. But time passed. The children grew up, got married, had their own lives. My mother passed away, my husband too. And suddenly, I was here, alive, healthy, alone, and without knowing what to do with all this time. At first, I thought it was just a phase, that it would pass. I started filling my days with small tasks. I cooked for the whole week, even knowing I would be eating alone. I cleaned the house with the same dedication as when there were 5 people living here. I called my children, but they were always busy. Not in a rude way, just busy, and I understood. I really understood. But understanding didn't fill the void. I had a routine that I followed religiously. I would wake up at 6 in the morning, even when I didn't need to. I would the kitchen. I would prepare coffee as if I were preparing it for a whole family. Sometimes, without thinking, I would put 2 cups on the table. And when I realized it, I would stare at that empty cup, feeling a tightness in my chest. I drank my coffee slowly, very slowly, because after coffee, what came next? The whole day, empty, silent, waiting to be filled with something I didn't know what it was. After coffee, I washed the dishes. I dried them. I put them away. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if I were trying to stretch time, trying to make those small tasks last longer. Because while I was doing something, anything, I didn't have to face the emptiness. But the moment always came, the moment when there was nothing left to do. And then that question would come again, and now what? I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. After all, I was healthy. I had a house. I had food in the refrigerator. I couldn't complain. There were people going through much worse things, but guilt didn't care about logic. It appeared in the same way every time I found myself sitting on the sofa, looking out the window, unable to explain what I was feeling. Because what I felt wasn't sadness. Not exactly. It wasn't loneliness, the kind that hurts when you want company. It was something else. It was as if I had lost a function, as if my body was still waiting for someone to need it, but no one needed it anymore. I remembered what it was like before. The rushed mornings, the noise, the complaints. Mom, where's my shirt? Mom, what's for lunch? Mom, have you seen my keys? I used to complain back then. I complained about being tired, about the rush, about never having a minute to myself. But now that I had all the minutes in the world to myself, I would give anything to hear those complaints again, to feel that tiredness again. Because at least in that tiredness there was purpose, there was life, there was movement. Once, my daughter came to visit me. She brought her grandson, a 6-year-old boy, full of energy. I was happy. I baked a cake, tidied the house, and put away some old toys I still kept. I spent the previous day preparing. I cleaned everything twice. I made that cake she always loved when she was a child. I set the table with a pretty tablecloth, cloth napkins, and crystal glasses that I almost never use. When they arrived, my heart filled with joy. The boy came running in, full of life, shouting, "Grandma!" I hugged him, smelled that childlike scent, felt that energy. For a moment, the house came alive again. They stayed for 2 hours. The boy played a little, ate a piece of cake, and soon got bored. He started asking for the tablet. My daughter looked at her cell phone several times. She answered messages. She made quick calls. She was there, but she wasn't really present. I tried to talk to her. I asked about work, about her husband, about the children. She answered, but automatically. Everything's fine, Mom. It's que de gars première wanted more. I wanted her to really tell me. I wanted to know how she was feeling, if she was tired, if she was happy, if she needed anything. But I couldn't ask, because it felt like I was being intrusive. It felt like I was demanding attention. Before leaving, she hugged me and said, "Mom, are you okay? Call me if you need anything, okay?" I said yes. That it was great. When I left Timkinjek, at the still-set table, at the crystal glasses I had washed so carefully, at the house that had become silent again, as if they had never been there. And I thought, why do I feel this way? Because I should have been happy. I should have been grateful for the visit. I should have enjoyed the rest of the cake, put things away, and moved on with my day. But I couldn't. I could only feel that emptiness again. That emptiness that seemed even bigger now, after having been filled for 2 hours. It was as if the visit had reminded me of what I no longer had, of the life that no longer existed, of the role that had ended. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. The sun was setting, the kitchen was getting dark, and I remained there, still, feeling, and then I cried. Not a loud cry, just those tears that flow on their own, without making a sound. Tears of exhaustion, of confusion, of guilt for not being able to simply be happy, because I should have been happy. I should have enjoyed my time, my freedom, but I didn't know how to do that. I spent my whole life being the foundation for other people, and when that role ended, I didn't know who I was without it. I finally got up, turned on the kitchen light, and put the cake away. I carefully washed the crystal glasses, one by one. I dried them. I put them back in the cupboard. I took the tablecloth off the table, folded it, and put it away as well. And when I finished, when everything was back in its place, I looked around. Everything clean, everything organized, everything in order, except me. I began to realize that this feeling wasn't new. It had always been there, just hidden beneath all the tasks, all the obligations. While I was busy, I didn't need to look at it. But now, with nothing to distract me, it became visible and heavy. A friend called me one afternoon, Nusa, whom I'd known for years. She asked if I wanted to go to a senior citizen social group. She said it had crafts, dancing, and conversations. She said it was good, that there were nice people, that I would enjoy it. I thanked them, but I didn't go. Not because I didn't want company, but because I couldn't imagine what it would be like to be there, surrounded by people I didn't know, pretending everything was fine, pretending I was one of those cheerful, energetic, happy ladies. Because I wasn't. I was empty. And I was sure that, if I were, people would notice. They would see right through me. They would see that I was hollow inside. I kept thinking about it for days. Why couldn't I just go? Why did everything seem to require an effort I no longer had? And then I realized I was tired, not of my body, of the role. Of having to be someone, of having to pretend I knew what to do with my own life. I started noticing little things, the way I made my bed every day, even knowing no one would see, the way I cooked as if I were expecting guests, the way I still lived as if someone were watching me, judging me, expecting something from me. But I wasn't. I was completely alone, and that somehow felt wrong. It shouldn't have been, but it seemed that way. There were times when I would stand still in the middle of the house, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do with my own body. It was a strange feeling, as if I didn't belong anywhere, not even in my own house. Sometimes I would go to the boys' room. I would stand in the doorway, looking. The beds were made. Everything was clean. Everything was in its place. But it was empty. So empty. I remembered when that room was full of life, full of mess, full of clothes scattered everywhere, full of siblings fighting, full of loud music, full of doors slamming. I complained so much. I asked for silence. I asked for organization. And now there was silence. There was organization, but there was no life. She closed the door slowly and went back into the room, and that weight on her chest grew a little heavier. There's something nobody talks about regarding aging. It's not about body aches or forgetting names or needing glasses for everything. It's about how you gradually become invisible without realizing it. And when you do realize it, you no longer know how to exist again. I started noticing this in the simplest places. At the supermarket, for example. I'd go shopping and stand there in the checkout line, holding my bag. The cashier barely looked at me. She'd scan the items, tell me the price, take the money, all automatically. I'd thank her, but she wouldn't respond. Not out of malice. Just because I wasn't being seen. I was just another old lady buying a few things, and I understood. I really understood. But it hurt just the same. There was also the silence of the house. That kind of silence that isn't peace. It's absence. It's when you realize you can spend the whole day without saying a word out loud because there's no one to hear you. At first, I'd turn on the television just to have some background noise. Then I started talking to myself. Silly things. Where's my cup? Oh, it's here. It's going to rain today. It wasn't madness. It was just a way of filling the void with something. It was strange to realize when it had started. I think it was gradual. At first, it was just occasional comments. It's so hot. I need to remember to water the plants. But little by little, I started talking more. I would describe what I was doing. I'm going to make coffee now. Let me see what's in the fridge. Once, my neighbor rang the doorbell right when I was talking to myself. I was mortified, afraid she might have heard. I stayed quiet for a few days. But I soon went back to it, because the silence was worse than the embarrassment of talking to myself. I started to realize that my days were all the same. I woke up at the same time. I had coffee in the same chair. I watched the same programs. I ate lunch alone. I took a nap. I woke up, and the rest of the day dragged on until bedtime again. And the next day, everything repeated itself, exactly the same. I was trying to change. I really was. One day, I decided to go for a walk at a different time. I went in the afternoon instead of the morning. But when I got home, I realized it hadn't made any difference. The emptiness was still there. Only now I was tired. The other day, I tried cooking something different. A recipe I saw online. I bought the ingredients, followed the step-by-step instructions. It was hard work. It took a long time. And when it was ready, I sat down to eat alone. The food was good, but it didn't taste like anything because there was no one to share it with. No one to say, it was Mom. No one to ask for a second helping. I ate half of it and kept the rest in the refrigerator. Days later, I threw it away because it had spoiled. And I thought, why? Why did I bother? My children would call occasionally. Always the same questions. Is everything all right? Mom, are you eating properly? Do you need anything? And I always answered yes, that everything was fine, that I didn't need anything, because it was true. I didn't need anything. But at the same time, I needed everything. I just didn't know how to ask, how I was going to tell my daughter, I need you to come, but not out of obligation. I need you to sit with me and really see me, to ask how I am and wait for a genuine answer, to not look at your phone while I'm talking, to not be in a hurry to leave. How could I say this without sounding needy, without sounding like a burden? So I didn't say anything. I stayed quiet. I said everything was fine. En de première waited. Always waiting. Once, my oldest son came to visit me on a Sunday. He brought his wife and two daughters. They stayed for lunch. I had prepared everything early in the day. I made the food they always loved when they were little. Rice, beans, breaded steak, French fries, and salad. I set the table with a tablecloth, napkins, and nice glasses. I wanted it to be special. They ate quickly. The girls were on their phones the whole time. I tried to start a conversation, asking about school, about their friends. They answered with monosyllables. Okay, cool, I don't know. They didn't even take their eyes off the screen. My son and daughter-in-law talked amongst themselves about work, about the renovations they were doing at home, about the children's school. I listened, sometimes offering my opinion, but it was as if I wasn't really there. It was as if I were part of the decor, the table, the chairs, Grandma. I tried to participate more in the conversation. I asked about the renovation. My son explained quickly, but soon went back to talking to his wife, using terms I didn't understand, talking about people I didn't know. I stayed there, eating my food, observing, and I realized something painful. I was there, at my own desk, in my own home, surrounded by my family. But I felt completely alone. After lunch, they stayed for another 20 minutes. The girls asked to leave. They wanted to get home for I don't know what. My son looked at his watch and agreed. They started saying goodbye. My son hugged me goodbye and said, "Mom, you look great. You're taking care of yourself, right? Call me if you need anything." I said yes. I thanked them for the visit. I waved from the doorway as they got into the car. They waved back. The car drove away. I closed the door. I turned around and I looked at the dirty table, the piled up plates, the leftover food. The silence had returned, as if they had never been there. I washed everything slowly, without rushing. I had nothing else to do anyway. I put things away. I folded the towel. I cleaned the table. And when I finished, I sat on the sofa and cried. Not a loud cry, just those tears that flow on their own, without making a sound. I cried because I realized they hadn't come to see me. They had come to fulfill an obligation, to visit their mother, to ease their longing. But no one had really seen me. No one had asked how I truly was. No one had noticed that I was different. And the worst part is that I couldn't blame them, because I also didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. If someone had asked, what would I have said? That I was sad for no reason. That I felt empty, even though I had everything. That I was afraid to wake up every day and realize that another day was going to pass without any meaning. Who would understand that? I started avoiding mirrors. Not because I thought I looked bad, but because every time I looked at myself, I saw a person I didn't recognize. My eyes were the same, but the sparkle was gone. It was as if I were extinguished inside. One morning, I was brushing my teeth and avoided looking in the mirror above the sink, but unintentionally, my gaze met my reflection, and I stood there, toothbrush in mouth, staring at that woman. White hair, deep wrinkles, tired eyes, downturned mouth. It was my mother. I had become my mother, and I remembered when she was at the end of her life. I remembered her gaze, that empty, distant look. At the time, I thought it was because of the illness, but now I understand. It wasn't the illness, it was this, that feeling of no longer having a place in the world. I spat out the toothpaste, rinsed my mouth, and left the bathroom quickly. I didn't want to look anymore. One day, I tried to get dressed up. I put on combedmière, clothes. There was no reason. I wasn't going anywhere, but I thought, I'm going out. I'm going to do something. I'm going to prove to myself that I can still do it. I went for a walk in the square. It was a beautiful day, sunny, but not too hot. There were people walking, children playing, couples sitting on benches. I sat on a bench and stayed there, watching the people. Mothers with small children. They ran after them, shouted watch out, wiped noses, straightened clothes. They were tired. I could see it in their faces, but they were alive. They had a purpose. They had someone who needed them. I saw young couples holding hands, talking, laughing. There was a couple arguing, the girl speaking loudly, the boy trying to calm her down. And I thought, even that's something I miss, having someone to argue with, someone who cares enough to argue with. There was a group of elderly people doing gymnastics, about 10 of them, maybe. The instructor was in front, everyone following the movements. They were talking amongst themselves, laughing. They seemed fine. They seemed to have found something. I stood there staring for a while. I thought about joining in, but I couldn't get up. I couldn't take that first step because it felt like if I went over there, everyone would stop and stare at me, and they would understand. They would realize that I didn't belong, that I was broken inside. So I sat on that bench for over an hour. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody even looked. And when I got home, I took off my lipstick, changed my clothes, and became invisible again. It was around that time that I started to realize something. I wasn't just alone. I was without purpose, and that was much worse. Because loneliness, you even learn to live with it. You learn to fill your time alone. But a lack of purpose, that eats you up inside. It's like waking up every day without a reason, without something that makes you want to get out of bed, without someone who needs you. I spent my whole life being needed. It was my identity, my reason for being, and suddenly it wasn't anymore. And I didn't know how to be anything else. I started having nightmares. Always the same one. I was in a large, empty house, looking for things Claudia, Roberto, João. But no one answered. I walked through the hallways, open doors, but all the rooms were empty. And the more I searched, the bigger the house got. More hallways, more doors, more emptiness. I woke up sweating, my heart racing. I looked around, the room dark and silent. And it took me a few minutes to remember where I was, to remember that this was my life now, that it wasn't a nightmare, it was real. There was one night I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything, thinking about how my life had gotten to that point, how I had done everything right. I got married, had children, took care of the house, worked when I needed to, raised my children with love. I was never perfect, but I always did my best. And now I was here, alone, in a silence that no one else would dare break. I thought about calling someone, my daughter, maybe, but what would I say? Daughter, I'm feeling strange. She would get worried. She would want to fix it. She would suggest a doctor, a medicine, an activity. She would try to fix it. And that wasn't it. It wasn't anything that could be fixed with a consultation or a pill, because the problem wasn't in my body. It was in my life, in the lack thereof. I got out of bed at 3 in the morning. I went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water. I looked out the window. The street was empty. The street lights illuminated the asphalt. Everything was quiet. Everything was still. Juste like me. And it was at that moment that I realized I was waiting for something to change, waiting for someone to need me again, waiting to go back to being who I was before. But what if that never happened? What if this was my life now? This silence, this emptiness, this endless waiting. What if I spent the next 10, 15 years like this, waking up every day without purpose, passing the time until bedtime, waiting for visits that lasted 2 hours and left me emptier than before? What if that was all there was to it until the end? That thought terrified me so much that I had to hold on to the sink. My legs were trembling. My heart was racing. I took a deep breath. Once, twice, 3 times. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there, eyes open, feeling the weight of something I couldn't name, a deep fear, an immense emptiness, a loneliness that wasn't about a lack of people, but about a lack of myself, because I no longer knew who I was. And I didn't know if there was still time to find out. I always thought I knew myself. 70 years of life, you already know what you like. But the truth is I never had time to truly get to know myself, because I was always defined by what I did for others. I was Joe's wife, Claudia and Roberto's mother, Donna, Maria's daughter, the neighbor who always helped, the friend who was always available. I was all those roles, but alone, with no one to serve, no one to care for. Who was I? That question started to haunt me. There were days when I would wake up and stay in bed longer than I should, not because I was tired, but because I saw no reason to get up. What would change if I stayed there for another 10 minutes, another half hour, another hour? Nothing was going to change. The house would remain the same. The silence would remain the same. I would remain the same. I would get up out of habit, out of obligation to myself. I would make coffee, drink coffee, wash the cup, and then that moment would come again. The moment when I looked at the whole day ahead and thought, and now what? I started paying attention to my thoughts, and I realized they were always the same. They always went back to the past, to when the children were small and the house was noisy, to when my husband was still alive and we shared the little things of the day, to when I had a clear role. I wasn't stuck in the past out of sadness. I stayed because I felt fulfilled there. I had a place there. I had a specific memory that came back almost every day. It was from an ordinary morning many years ago. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. My husband was reading the newspaper at the table. The children were fighting over I don't know what. The house was a mess. I was tired, sleepy, wanting everyone to leave quickly so I could breathe. But now, remembering that scene, I would give anything to go back to it, to hear that sound again, to feel that weariness again, because at least in that weariness there was life, there was movement, there was meaning. I tried to keep myself busy in other ways. I picked up some books I'd always wanted to read but never had time for, but I couldn't concentrate. I'd read the same page 3 times and understand nothing. My mind was always somewhere else, always in that void. I tried watching movies, but in the middle of them, I would pause and stare at the screen without really watching. I tried crocheting, that thing my mother used to do and that I thought was beautiful. I bought yarn, a hook, and learned how to do it on the computer. But after half an hour, I would give up, because it was pointless. Nothing filled the void. What I was feeling wasn't a lack of activity. It was a lack of meaning. And then the guilt came back, because I found myself thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just enjoy my life? Why can't I be happy with what I have? I saw other women my age. Some travailled, others did voluntary, seemed happy. And I thought, why can't I be like that? Was the problem with me? Was I weak? Was I ungrateful? Guilt always came accompanied by these questions. And the more I tried to answer them, the more confused I became. I started questioning things I'd never questioned before. Why did I always do everything for others? Why did I never stop to think about what I wanted? Why did I always put my needs last? And the answer was simple, but painful, because that's what they expected of me, and I never wanted to disappoint them. From a young age, I was taught that a good woman is a woman who serves, who cares, who doesn't complain, who is always available. And I was all of that. I was the obedient girl, the devoted wife, the present mother, the caring daughter. But no one had taught me what to do when those roles ran out. No one had prepared me for the emptiness that would come afterward. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch when my neighbor walked by. She waved, smiled, and asked how I was. I said I was fine. She commented that it had been a while since she'd seen me on the street. I made up some excuse, saying I was busy with some things at home. She said that's good and left. I sat there thinking about that little lie. Busy with what? I had nothing to do, but I couldn't say that, because admitting I had nothing to do felt like admitting I was worthless. And that's when I understood something. I had spent my entire life associating my worth with what I did. If I was caring, cleaning, cooking, helping, I had value. I mattered. But if I wasn't doing anything, then what was left? Nothing, or at least that's how I felt. I began to realize that this way of thinking hadn't started now. It had always been there. Since childhood, I had learned that a good woman is a useful woman, a woman who serves, a woman who doesn't complain, a woman who is always available. And I had been all of that. I had been the right woman, the useful woman. But now that no one needed me anymore, I didn't know who to be. I remembered a time many years ago when my youngest son was about 10 years old. He came home from school complaining of hunger. I was in the middle of a heavy cleaning job, tired and sweaty. But I dropped everything, went to the kitchen and made him a snack. He ate quickly, barely looked at me, and ran off to play. I went back to cleaning, and I remember feeling a discomfort at the time. A slight discomfort that soon passed. But now, looking back, I understand what that discomfort was. It was the feeling that I was invisible, that my role was to serve, but not to be seen. And I had carried that feeling my whole life. But I was always too distracted, too busy, to notice it. One day my daughter called me. She seemed tired. She said she was overwhelmed, that the girls were difficult, that work was hard. I listened to everything, gave her some advice, and said it would pass. When she hung up, I felt a little better, because for a few minutes I had been useful again. I had been needed. But then that feeling of emptiness came back, because I knew that soon she would hang up and go on with her life, and I would be invisible again. And it was at that moment that I realized something painful. I was using the needs of others to feel alive, to feel important. And when those needs disappeared, I disappeared along with them. But it wasn't their fault. It was mine. For having built my entire identity on top of that, I began to understand that what I was feeling wasn't just about being alone. It was about no longer having a place in the world. It was about having been defined by a role my whole life. And now that role no longer existed. And nobody had prepared me for this. No one had ever told me, one day you'll grow old and the people you've cared for your whole life will move on. And you'll be left behind. And it will hurt. And you'll feel guilty for feeling this way. No one had warned me that the emptiness was coming, and that it wouldn't go away just because I wanted it to. I started paying more attention to the little things. The way I tidied the kitchen every day, even without a reason. The way I looked at the phone waiting for a call. The way I sat at the window, watching other people's lives go by. And I realized I was living on autopilot, doing things because I'd always done them, waiting for something to change, but doing nothing to change it. Because what could I do? What was within my reach? That question stayed with me for weeks. I had no answer. I just had a feeling that something needed to be different, but I didn't know what or how. I also started noticing how I talked to myself. The thoughts that came into my head were almost always critical. You're good for nothing. You're a burden. You should be happy. But you can't. What's wrong with you? They were cruel thoughts, and I had never noticed them before, because they were so ingrained in mind that they seem to be worthily true. I started to question, and the more I questioned, the more I realized that no, they weren't true. They were just old patterns, old ways of thinking that I had carried my whole life without realizing it. One night, I sat in the living room, turned off the television, and stayed there in silence. Just me, the empty house, and that weight on my chest. I closed my eyes and tried to feel what I was feeling without running away, without turning on the TV, without distracting myself, without pretending that everything was all right. And what I felt was fear. I was afraid that this was my life now. Afraid that the next 10, 15 years would be like this, empty, meaningless, waiting for something that would never come. A fear that I had already lived everything I had to live, and that the rest was just waiting for the end. That thought scared me so much that I opened my eyes immediately. My heart was racing. My hands were trembling. I got up, went to the kitchen, and drank a glass of water. I looked out the window. The street was empty. The street lights illuminated the wet asphalt. It had rained earlier, and I hadn't even noticed. I stood there, still, holding the glass, feeling the weight of what I had just felt, and then another thought came. A quiet, but firm thought. What if it's not like that? What if there's still something left? It wasn't a certainty. It wasn't an answer. It was just a possibility, a small sliver of light in the darkness. I went back to the room. I sat down again. On the tea team, I looked at Hausen so well. At the furniture I had chosen so many years ago. At the photos on the wall, everything in its place, everything clean, everything in order, except me. But maybe, just maybe, I could start putting myself in that place too, not going back to who I was, but discovering who I could be now. I didn't know how. I didn't have a plan. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than emptiness. I felt a slight curiosity, a timid desire to find out. And that, however small, was something. I can't say exactly when things started to change. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was more like a silent surrender. Like when you stop fighting against a current and simply let it carry you away. It happened on an ordinary morning. I woke up with that same feeling as always. The weight on my chest. The lack of motivation. The whole day ahead with nothing that really mattered. I went to the kitchen, put the water on to boil, and grabbed the mug. And then, without thinking much, instead of sitting in my usual chair, I opened the back door and sat on the porch step, with my cup in hand, for no raison. Just because. The sun was rising. It was still cool. The birds were chirping in the trees. I stood there, drinking my coffee, watching. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about anything. I wasn't expecting anything. I was just there. It was strange, because it wasn't a special moment. Nothing different happened, but something inside me felt lighter, as if, for a few minutes, I had stopped carrying a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. When I finished my coffee, I went back inside, and the day continued as normal, but something had changed. Not in the day, in me. In the following days, I began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed. The way the light streamed through the window in the morning, the sound of the rain falling on the roof, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, small things, things that had always been there, but that I had never really paid attention to. I wasn't trying to feel better. I wasn't making any conscious effort. I was just stopping the struggle, stopping trying to fill the void with anything, stopping blaming myself for feeling it. And something curious began to happen. The less I resisted the emptiness, the lighter it seemed. It wasn't that he had gone away. He was still there. But it was as if I had stopped fighting with him, as if I had accepted that he was a part of me now. And that, maybe, this wasn't the end of the world. One afternoon, I was cleaning out an old drawer and found some old photos. Photos from when I was young, from when I got married, from when I had the boys. Photos of birthday parties, Christmases, trips. I sat on the living room floor and stared at those photos for a long time. And for the first time, I didn't feel that suffocating longing for the past. I didn't feel the urge to go back. I only felt a lightness, a silent gratitude for having lived through all of that, for having been that person, for having been a part of those lives. But I also felt something else. I felt that the person in the photos was no longer me, and that was okay, because I didn't need to be that person anymore. I didn't need to go back to being the young mother, the devoted wife, the woman who took care of everyone. I could be something else now, even without yet knowing what that something else was. There was one particular photo that caught my attention. It was from my 40th birthday. I was in the middle of the room, surrounded by people with a huge cake in front of me. Everyone was singing happy birthday, and in the photo, I was smiling. But looking at it now, 30 years later, I could see something I hadn't seen before. In my eyes, even while smiling, there was a weariness, a silent exhaustion. I remembered that day. I remembered that I had spent the whole morning preparing everything, the food, the decorations, tidying up the house. My husband had helped a little, but most of it was me. And when everyone arrived, when the party started, I was happy. I really was. But I was also exhausted. And I remembered that night, after everyone had left, after washing the dishes and putting things away, I sat alone in the kitchen and cried. I didn't know why at the time. I thought it was just tiredness. But now I understood. I was crying because, even surrounded by people, even being the center of attention, I felt alone. Because no one had asked if I was okay. No one had noticed how tired I was. I've always been good at hiding things. I've always been good at smiling, even when things were difficult, because that's what was expected of me. And I never wanted to disappoint. I put the photos back in the drawer. I got up from the floor, and when I looked around my empty house, I felt something different. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't longing. It was almost like a relief. Because now, at least, I didn't have to pretend anymore. I started going out more, not to specific places. I didn't have a plan. I just went out. I walked through the neighborhood streets. I passed through the square. I sat on a bench. I observed, and I started noticing other people who were alone too. A gentleman who walked every day at the same time, always alone. A woman who sat in the square with a book, but rarely turned the page. An old dog that lay in the shade with no hurry to go anywhere. I didn't talk to these people, but there was a strange comfort in knowing they existed. in knowing I wasn't the only one living in silence. One day, while I was sitting in the square, a woman about my age sat on the bench next to me. She had a shopping bag in her lap. We sat there, the two of us, without saying anything. After a few minutes, she looked at me and gave a small smile. Première smiled back. We didn't exchange a word. But there was something in that moment, a silent understanding. Si fue nu, without her. That were the same reason. When she got up and left, I kept thinking about it. About how sometimes we don't need grand gestures. Sometimes a small smile from a stranger is enough to remind you that you still exist. I started changing small things in my routine. Nothing too big, just little things. I started having coffee at different times. Cleaning the house only when I really needed to and not out of obligation. Leaving the dishes in the sink if I was tired. And I realized that nothing bad was happening. The world wasn't falling apart. I wasn't ceasing to be who I was. I was just being kinder to myself. At first, it bothered me a little because I had been raised to be disciplined, to keep everything in order. Leaving the dishes in the sink seemed wrong. It seemed careless. But little by little, I came to understand that it wasn't. It was just tiredness. It was just a 70-year-old body asking for rest. And it was okay to heed that request. There were days when I still woke up with that weight on my face. There were still days when the emptiness seemed bigger than me. But on those days, instead of trying to fight it, I just stayed quiet. I let it be there and waited for it to pass. And it always passed. One morning I woke up, and the first thing that came to my mind was that familiar heaviness, that feeling of, but instead of trying to distract myself, I stayed lying, staring at the ceiling, feeling, and I thought, okay, today is a difficult day, and that's okay. I didn't try to change how I was feeling. I didn't try to convince myself that everything was okay when it wasn't. I just accepted it. And when I finally stood up, the weight was still there. But it wasn't unbearable. It was just heavy. And I could carry it. My daughter called me one afternoon. She said she was going to spend the weekend there with the girls. She asked if I wanted her to bring anything, if I needed anything. I said no, that everything was fine. Antitim, when I didn't desfora. I wasn't anxiously waiting for the weekend. I wasn't counting the days. I just felt calm, knowing that they were coming, that it was going to be good, and that afterwards they would leave, and that everything was all right. I hadn't stopped loving them. I hadn't stopped wanting to see them. But I had stopped basing my entire existence on those visits. I had stopped expecting them to fill the void that only I could fill. When they came over the weekend, it was different. I hadn't prepared anything special. I hadn't cooked days in advance. I made a simple lunch. And when they arrived, I was calm, present. I wasn't worried about being the perfect mother. I was just being myself. And you know what happened. My daughter noticed. She looked at me in the middle of lunch and said, "Mom, you look different, lighter." I smiled. I couldn't explain it, but it was true. I felt lighter. The girls played in the yard. My daughter, andouet talked, réali talked. Not that quick, superficial conversation we always have. She told me about her work, about the difficulties with the children, about how tired she felt sometimes. And I listened, without trying to solve anything, without giving advice. I just listened. When they left, I didn't cry. I didn't feel that suffocating emptiness. I only felt peace, gratitude for having had that moment. and a certainty that it was okay for me to be alone again. I also started noticing that the people around me were different, or maybe it was me who was different. I don't know, but things seemed to flow better. My neighbor started stopping to chat more often. Short conversations, nothing deep, but she would stop, and I noticed. The young man at the bakery, who had barely looked at me before, started greeting me by name. One day, he even asked if I was okay, saying it had been a while since he'd seen me there. And I realized he had noticed. I had become visible again. But the strangest thing is that I hadn't done anything different. I had simply stopped carrying that invisible weight, that silent expectation that someone needed to save me, that something external needed to change for me to feel better. I had stopped waiting, and somehow that had changed everything. Not that everything was perfect now. It wasn't. There were still difficult days. There were still moments of loneliness. But it was different because I wasn't fighting against them anymore. I was just living through them. One afternoon, I was watering the plants in the backyard when I noticed something curious. The plants I took the most care of, the ones I watered every day, the ones I worried about, weren't as beautiful as the ones I kind of forgot about. The ones I left alone, that received rain when it rained and sun when it was sunny, without much interference from me, were beautiful, lush, strong, and I thought, maybe it's the same for me too. Maybe I need to stop trying so hard, stop forcing myself to be okay, stop resisting what I'm feeling, and just let things be. I don't know if it makes sense, but to me, at that moment, it did. I started writing. Nothing to lab notes thought, ting première felt. I bought a simple notebook and left it on the kitchen table. When a thought came to me, I wrote it down. Sometimes it was just a sentence. Sometimes it was pages. It wasn't meant for anyone else to read. It was just for me. A way to get out what was inside. And I realized it helped. It ding beauty-tel ped. One-eind almost as leap came to me. A thought that made me open my eyes. It was something simple, almost silly, but it touched me in a profound way. I thought, I'm still here. Not in the sense of I'm still alive, but in the sense that despite everything, despite all the emptiness, all the guilt, all the loneliness, I was still here, whole, present, breathing. And perhaps that would be enough. It wasn't a euphoric revelation. It wasn't a miraculous cure. It was just a silent acceptance that this was what life was now. That I wasn't going to be who I was again. That the emptiness might never completely go away, but that I could live with it. I could coexist with it. I could even, in some strange way, make peace with it. Because the emptiness wasn't destroying me. It was just there. And I could choose how to relate to it. I could fight. I could resist. You could blame me. Or I could simply accept it and live, one day at a time, one moment at a time. I closed my eyes again, and for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. The days went on, one after another. But they were different now, not because something big had changed, but because I had changed. Or maybe I had just stopped fighting against what I had always been. I started noticing patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. Small thing, like the fact that every time I stopped demanding so much of myself, things around me flowed better. Not in a magical way, but in a real way, observable. For example, there were weeks when I would wake up feeling heavy, carrying that same weight, as always, waiting for someone to call, for something to happen. And during those weeks, nothing happened. The phone was silent. The house was empty. Time dragged on. But there were other weeks. Weeks when I woke up and simply accepted the day as it was, without expectations, without demands. And in those weeks, things happened. My daughter would call for no specific reason, just to chat. The neighbor would knock on the door with an extra cake she had baked. The guy at the market would give me a discount on a piece of fruit that was almost expired. Coincidence? Maybe, but it happened to often to be just chance. I started paying attention to it, not in a scientific way, but in a quiet way, observing, and the more I observed, the clearer it became. When I was at peace with myself, the world around me responded differently. It wasn't that other people changed. It was that I changed. And this internal change made me see things differently. Or perhaps it made other people see me differently. One day I was in line at the bank. It was a long, slow line, the kind of situation that used to irritate me. But that day, I was calm. I wasn't in a hurry. I had nothing waiting for me at home. So I stood there, observing the people. There was a young woman in front of me who seemed stressed. She kept looking at her watch, sighing loudly and tapping her foot. À son point, she turned to me and said, somewhat nervously, "This line never moves." I smiled and said, "Yeah, but there's not much we can do, is there?" "Just wait." She looked at me as if I had said something strange. But after a few seconds, her face relaxed a little. She gave a small smile and said, "Yes, you're right." We chatted. She told me she was late picking up her son from school, that she had a million things to do, that her day had been chaotic. I listened. I didn't give advice. I didn't try to solve anything. I just listened. When it was her turn, she turned around before leaving and said, "Thank you. You know, you calmed me down. I hadn't done anything. I just stood there, quietly listening. But somehow, that had been enough. And I thought, that's it. That's what I was missing. Not being needed in the sense of solving everyone's problems, but being a presence, a calm presence, a presence that doesn't demand, doesn't judge, doesn't expect anything in return. I started to notice that this happened in other places too. À the bakery, at the market, in the square. When I was at peace, people would approach me, not in an invasive way, but in a natural way. A quick chat, a smile, a more sincere good morning. And I understood now. People hadn't changed. I was the one who had stopped carrying that heavy energy. That silent expectation that someone needed to save me, fill me up, give me a purpose. I had stopped waiting outside and had started cultivating something inside. Not that I was always okay. I wasn't. I still had bad days. Days when I woke up and the weight was still there, whole, suffocating. But even on those days, something was different because I no longer fought against it. When it came, I let it be. I stayed quiet. Sometimes I wrote in my notebook. Other times, I just sat on the porch and let time pass. And always, it passed. And every time he passed by, I felt a little stronger. Not strong in the sense of being invincible, but strong in the sense that I knew I could get through it, that I could survive him, that he wasn't going to destroy me. One morning I woke up and, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel heavy. I just felt nothing, a peaceful nothingness, a light nothingness, and that was strange. Because I had become so accustomed to the weight that its absence felt wrong. I lay there for a while, checking on him, waiting for him to come back, but He didn't, at least not that day. I got up, made my coffee, and sat on the porch. The sun was beginning to rise. The birds were singing, and I was there, present, alive, without feeling guilty for not doing anything useful. Because I had understood something that took me 70 years to understand. I didn't need to be useful to have value. I didn't need to be taking care of someone to matter. I didn't need to be filling a role to exist. I could simply be. And that was enough. It wasn't a sudden revelation. It was a slow understanding, built up over days, weeks, small moments when I chose to stop fighting and simply accept. And the more I accepted, the more things changed. Not external things, but the way I related to them. My daughter started calling me more often, not because I was nagging her, not because I was hurt when she didn't call, but because somehow she sensed that everything was okay, that I was okay, and that made her want to be there for me. My son more distant started sampling a picture of his grandson, a good morning, Mom, small gestures, but things that didn't happen before. And I noticed the difference. It wasn't that they had suddenly changed. It was that I had stopped expecting something from them that they couldn't give. I had stopped putting my happiness in their hands. And that, somehow, had freed them to approach me in their own way, in their own time. My neighbors started inviting me over for coffee every now and then. Simple conversations, nothing deep, but there was a lightness to it, company without any pressure, and that was nice. I started participating in walks that took place in the square every Tuesday and Thursday morning. They were women more or less my age. We walked, talked, sometimes stopped to drink water and laugh about something silly. I didn't tell them my story. I didn't talk about the emptiness, the guilt, everything I'd been through. But I didn't need to, because looking into their eyes, I knew they understood. Each in their own way, each with their own story, but all carrying something similar. And there was comfort in that, in knowing that I wasn't alone, that other women had also gone through this. That other women had also felt invisible, unnecessary, empty, and that they had survived. And I was surviving too. One afternoon, one of them, Donna Celia, stayed behind after the walk. She seemed quiet, different. I sat with her on a bench and asked if everything was all right. She took a while to answer, and when she did, her voice was trembling. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said. "I've spent my whole life being a mother, a wife, taking care of everyone. And now that nobody needs me anymore, I don't know what to do." I looked at her, and I saw myself a few months ago. I saw the same emptiness, the same confusion, the same guilt. I held her hand and said, "I understand. I've been through this too." She looked at me, surprised, as if she couldn't believe that anyone could understand what she was feeling. We sat there in silence. I didn't try to solve anything. I didn't give advice. I just stayed there, holding her hand, letting her know she wasn't alone. After a while, she shook my hand and said, "Thank you," and I understood, at that moment, that perhaps this was my new purpose. Not caring in the sense of solving problems, of doing everything for others, but caring in the sense of being present, of listening, of holding someone's hand when they need it, because I now knew what it was like to feel invisible. And I knew how much of a difference it made when someone saw you. The days went by. Enduit et ashamed to live in a life. It wasn't a life full of great moments, but it was a real life. A life where emptiness still appeared from time to time, but it didn't scare me. anymore. Because I had learned something fundamental. The emptiness wasn't the problem. The struggle against it was. When I accepted that the emptiness was a part of me, when I stopped trying to fill it with external things, it lost its power. It was still there, but it no longer controlled me. And I also realized something else, something I couldn't see before. All my life, I had lived reacting to the needs of others, reacting to expectations, reacting to what the world demanded of me. I ask quoi de premier one? What makes me feel good? Who am I when I'm not serving anyone? And now, for the first time, I was finding out. I discovered that I liked being quiet, observing, feeling the sun on my face, drinking coffee without rushing, writing in my notebook, walking aimlessly, sitting in the squampling, things that once seemed like a waste of time. But now I understood that they were the essence of life, because life wasn't about being useful all the time. It wasn't about always doing something productive. It was about being present, about feeling, about existing. And I was learning how to do that, slowly, one day at a time. One night, I was sitting on the porch, looking at the stars. It had been a long time since I'd looked at the sky like that, calmly, attentively, and as I looked, I thought about everything I had lived through in the last few months. The emptiness that almost swallowed me whole, the guilt that almost destroyed me, the loneliness that almost broke me. But I also thought about the peace I had found, the acceptance, the lightness, and I realized that all of that had been necessary. The emptiness had been necessary because it was what forced me to look inside. It was what showed me that I could no longer live the way I was living. It was what forced me to change. And the change didn't come from the outside. It didn't come from someone saving me. It didn't come from a magic solution. It came from within, from a silent choice to stop fighting and start accepting, to understand that I didn't need to be who I always was, that I could be something else, that I could just be me, and that was enough. I looked at the stars and felt a profound gratitude, not for the things I had, but for being there, for having made it through, for still being alive, for still having time. Because life hadn't ended. It had only changed, and I had changed along with it. And everything was fine. Première went ainsi to turn off into sleep. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty about anything. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel weighed down. I felt only a silent peace. A peace that came from within. A peace that no one could take away from me. Because she was mine. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. That way, you'll be notified whenever a new story like this is shared here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment. You can share if you've experienced something similar, what this story evoked in you, or even where you're watching from. Sometimes, writing a few words is the first step in realizing you're not alone.